A young Carl Fredricksen, a shy and bespectacled lad with a vintage pilot's cap and goggles, sits in a theater and sees a film reel about his hero, the renowned explorer Charles Muntz. The journalist lists Muntz's many achievements and discoveries before mentioning that his latest find, a gigantic skeleton of a bird, was discredited by scientists who thought it was fake. With his dog squad in tow, Muntz boards his Zeppelin to prove them incorrect. He says he'll come back with living proof of his discovery. Carl takes off running down the street with his balloon after the show, honoring Muntz's Zeppelin, the spirit of adventure. As he walks by a dilapidated home, he hears Muntz's catchphrase, "Adventure is out there," yelled from within. Carl walks inside to look into the matter and finds a young, confident tomboy who loves adventure and looks up to Charles Muntz just as he does. Carl is so taken aback by her boisterous, boyish behavior that he lets his balloon drift off into the ceiling. Carl jumps off a beam and breaks his arm, but Ellie helps him get it back. That night, Ellie visits him in his bed without his knowledge and shows him her adventure book, in which she tells him she wants to one day live on top of Paradise Falls in South America by showing him a picture she pulled directly out of a library book. She stops only after he promises to join her there eventually. Carl and Ellie's wedding and subsequent move into the house where they originally met is depicted in a musical montage. A happy marriage and new careers as a balloon salesman and zookeeper follow. They decide to save up for a trip to Paradise Falls after Ellie learns she cannot have children. However, as time passes, they are compelled to use money set aside for Niagara Falls to pay for other expenses. In later years, Carl remembers that he and Ellie were never able to go their honeymoon to South America, despite the fact that they had been a happy couple. But Ellie's health declines and she is hospitalized, and she passes away, leaving Carl all alone. Carl is a retired sourpuss who has chosen to stay put in his home despite the expansion of the city around him. As building has picked up, his foreman has been urging him to transfer to a retirement community, but he has been arguing with him and refusing to go. Later, he encounters Russell, a young scout who is exploring the forest and who, in order to achieve his helping the elderly badge, tries to help Carl. To encourage Russell to help, Carl tells him to find the snipe in his yard and get rid of it. Carl strikes the construction worker over the head with his walker after the man breaks his mailbox, a beloved feature of Carl's home and Ellie's personality. After being found guilty of assault, he was ordered to vacate his residence by the judge the next day. The next day, when workers from the Shady Oaks retirement home come to fetch him up, they are taken aback to see Carl releasing millions of helium balloons into the air, which then lift his house off its foundation and send it soaring over the city and into the sky. Carl, now safely removed from the urban environment, plots a course for South America before settling into his chair and preparing for a nap. As soon as he opens the door, he sees Russell clinging to the porch for dear life. It turns out that Russell had been snipe hunting under Carl's porch. After letting him in, Carl decides to go back down and bring Russell back home before the storm comes. Carl secures most of his belongings in the house before passing out, despite the tremors. The next morning, Russell wakes him up and informs him that, despite the dense fog outside, they are actually over South America, thanks to a GPS device that he had thrown out the window the night before. Carl lets the balloons go, but they crash to the ground too soon and scatter. With the help of a hose tied to the porch, they are able to keep hold of it until the fog clears, at which point they will see that they are actually on a high plateau just across from Paradise Falls. After realizing they can't get back into the house, they decide to trek to the falls before the helium in the balloons runs out. The pursuit continues through the woods. When the fine-tuning of Carl's hearing aid is picked up by the sensitive ears of the three dogs wearing red lights on their collars, the birds escape. While on the toilet break, Russell encounters a large bird, which he eventually coaxes closer to with a chocolate bar. His name for the vibrant creature is Kevin, and he shares it with Carl. Kevin continues to tag along, but he quickly abandons ship when they approach the shadowy figure of a man who yells at them. They investigate and discover that the guy is actually an optical illusion created by the stone's overlap. A golden retriever comes up to them, his collar illuminated by a red light. Russell commands the dog to sit, and to his astonishment, the canine responds via the collar gadget. As soon as he introduces himself as Doug and claims to be a tracker on the hunt for a bird, Kevin dives for him. Carl complains about having to travel with three others, but the group presses on. Kevin makes a loud call out and is met with softer responses. Doug tells Russell that Kevin is a female who is calling to her young. Meanwhile, Carl and Russell, who are now known as the mailman by the neighborhood dogs, have been spotted by the trio of canines that were previously seen pursuing the bird. The pack's Doberman Pinscher leader, Alpha, cautions his canine companions, the Rottweiler Beta and the Bulldog Gamma, to remain alert and persistent in their hunt. It sounds as though something is wrong with his talking equipment, since he is talking at an unusually high pitch. Alpha uses the gadget on Gamma's collar to contact Doug, whom they had sent on a phony errand to get rid of, but who was actually hanging out with the bird they were trying to catch. In short order, they've located him, and have bumped into Carl and Russell, but Kevin has disappeared. They decide to bring Carl and Russell to their lord instead. Carl and Russell enter a wide ravine and are immediately greeted by a group of dogs wearing high-tech collars, the owner of which is none other than the old Charles Muntz. Muntz first welcomes them as visitors at the Spirit of Adventure, but his attitude quickly changes as he learns that Russell has acquired a bird as a pet. When Carl learns that Muntz has spent the last decade or so searching for the bird for which he was exposed as a phony, he is astonished. Muntz brings out a table of head mannequins decked out in various headgear, and he grimly smashes each one off with his cane as he tells the story of the people who wore them, alleging that they were all for his bird. Carl and Russell escape the Zeppelin at the same time as Muntz spots the bird crowing on Carl's roof. Kevin is hurt, but Carl and Doug, who now calls Carl Master, manage to escape Muntz's dogs by riding on Kevin's back. Despite Carl's promise to assist Kevin return to her infants, a net flies out and catches her just as she enters her labyrinth house. A tracking device attached to Doug's collar led Muntz and his dogs to the location, and they have now arrived via Zeppelin. Muntz lights Carl's house on fire by throwing a lantern at it. While Muntz is loading Kevin onto the boat, Carl disregards Kevin and rushes over to put out the fire. Carl, discouraged and angry, screams at Doug and informs Russell that he is moving to Paradise Falls no matter what. Even if he successfully relocates his home to the falls, he loses Russell's esteem for abandoning Kevin. Carl enters the house and settles in front of the couch to read Ellie's storybook. As he is about to close the book, remembering how sad it is that she never saw Niagara Falls, he comes across some extra photos he forgot to include earlier. Ellie ends the book with a handwritten letter that reads, "Thanks for the adventure, now go have another one of your own." Carl, newly enlightened and brimming with enthusiasm, rushes outside in time to see Russell launch a handful of balloons into the air with the aid of a leaf blower. Carl clears out all the unnecessary stuff in his house so it can take off again, and then he and Russell go on the run. After seeing Doug on his porch, he proudly declares, "I am the master of this dog." Despite Muntz's best efforts, Russell is discovered on board the Zeppelin and promptly fettered to a chair. Muntz places him atop the ship's bomb bay doors and presses a button. Carl arrives in time to save Russell, taking him back to the house while he and Doug go get Kevin from the Zeppelin. Using a tennis ball from his walker, he manages to distract the guard dogs and liberate Kevin, only to be met by Muntz. While Russell, liberated from his bonds, fights off a squadron of dogs in fighter jets, Carl and Russell engage in a sword duel, although Carl uses his extended walker. He takes back control of the home and heads back to assist Carl, who has followed Kevin to the Zeppelin's peak. Meanwhile, Doug has confronted Alpha and defeated him, effectively becoming the new Alpha, and has fled to the surface to join the others. Kevin, Doug, and Carl hurried to the house that Russell has landed on the wing of the Zeppelin, but Muntz comes with a rifle and fires at them, knocking the house off the wing and leaving it dangling in the air. Carl fights to keep the house from collapsing as Muntz enters after Kevin. Carl uses chocolate to get Kevin to follow him outside while carrying Doug and Russell, while Muntz follows suit by attempting to leap from the window. His foot becomes trapped in the balloon strings, and he plummets to his death when his weight is too great for the balloons to support. Carl reluctantly lets go of his house as Kevin, Doug, and Russell return to the Zeppelin, but ultimately decides that letting it fall into the skies is for the best. Carl drives Russell and Doug back to their house so that Russell can attend his senior explorer ceremony and return Kevin to her 3 chicks. Carl steps in to play the role of Russell's father and presents Russell with the grape soda badge, nicknamed the Ellie badge, Ellie had given him at their first meeting. After that, Carl acts as a surrogate grandfather to Russell as the two of them sit on a sidewalk outside of an ice cream shop, with the Spirit of Adventure tethered overhead. Carl and Ellie's house at Paradise Falls is perfectly situated on the cliff above the falls, just as it was always meant to be. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for other recaps.